I'm Michele Bonino, professor of architecture here and rector delegates for relations with China, but let me thank very much our guests. I will introduce them in detail later when they will give their first round of speeches before the common discussion. So Antoine Picon from Harvard University, Carlo Ratti from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Unfortunately, Professor Zhang Li from Tsinghua University in Beijing can't be here today because of a visa issue, but as you will see later, he sent a video for us on the topic of this panel. So we will project it at the end of the first round. I said a general reflection about technology of the city. Let me just start with two short points that are both of them, let's say, taken from the framework of the Festival of della Tecnologia. The first is about time. I remember 2 days ago in the opening of the festival, the two curators of the festival, Professor De Biase and De Martin, they said how from the Industrial Revolution on, a kind of divide in speed between the innovation that became very fast and the social issue that tried to run behind, tried to keep the gap, to reduce the gap with innovation started. And so this created opportunity, difficulties. But I will say that maybe city is the much evident element of this phenomenon. Cities are typically slow to transform. They are stratificated. They change relatively slow during century. And so what happened with technology that is fast, and these years is very fast with city? This is a first question that our guest, I think, will try to answer. The second topic, technology and humanity, that is the frame of this festival. In this divide between technology and city, I think that humans can play a very important role. So this is why we invited Antoine Picon to give the first speech, because this is titled Technology and the City, What About the Humans? So I give you the floor, just with few words of introduction about you, Professor of History of Architecture and Technology at Harvard Graduate School of Design, Chairman of the Fondation Le Corbusier in Paris and Chevalier des Arts et des Lettres in France since 2014. And talking about main publication, the very important study from the 90s about history of technology and engineering in the age of alignments, to the recent text on digital culture and smart cities that make the presence of Antoine to this panel very important. I thank you very much to be here with us.
Thank you, Michele, for having me today. So, the title I've chosen for this short presentation may seem strange at first. Insofar, what about the humans? Humans are actually central in the new digital technologies that are transforming city under our eyes. So what I'm going to do is actually to start by this central character, to try to unpack it a little bit before discussing some of its limits, because we might want to overcome these limits if we want our cities to really improve through the use of digital tools. So humans are central for a number of reasons. The digital and the smart city that is gradually emerging is to a large extent based on an extensive tracking of human activities. This is one of the main sources of what we call big data today. This tracking explains the key role of geolocation. We track not only what humans do, but where they do it. This is what makes MAP so strategic today, and Carlo Ratti's Sensible Lab was clearly a pioneer in this tracking at the scale of the city. Here, his Rome, real-time Rome project. Second, the smart city is also about creating profiles of people. We all have very diverse profiles stored on the internet, either as website user or as clients, but also as citizens. Users, client, citizens, this trilogy corresponds to a large number of profiles, which may be very different one from another. Part of the vertigo we feel when we discuss contemporary identity is linked to this diversity. Tracking and profiling converge on the notion of control. whether we like it or not, companies, institutions, and governments are tempted to take control of us, or at least partially. This goes from Amazon trying to orient our consumption patterns to hyper-ambitious enterprise like the Chinese social credit system. In between the two, we have policing strategies that equate control with surveillance. Control can thus be related to commercial, policing, or governance objective. The planetary success of the control room is actually emblematic of the importance of these objectives. And finally, there is empowerment. The reason that justifies, at least officially, tracking, profiling, and controlling is that they are supposed to find their counterpart in providing new and exciting opportunities to citizens. And from festive flash mobs to fab labs, empowerment is a key aspect of digital culture. So this human-centric perspective has altered profoundly the way we understand city. So I'd like to insist a little bit about that. Cities are not natural entities. They're not like, animals or whatever. It's not a natural species. They are cultural construct inspired by what literally matters to us. What matters may be understood in actually two ways which are interconnected. The first is what matters. What is the matter from which cities are made? But what matters means also in English, what is important in a city, what needs to be monitored and steered. So for a very long time, one could argue that cities were actually made of brick and mortar, or stone sometimes. So cities were actually a collection of built objects, from churches to fortification, etc. Then, at the time of the first industrial revolution, they appeared more and more as constituted of flows. Flows of good and people mattered more than built object, and this is, for example, late 19th century Paris, but what seemed to be mattering more than the avenues and the squares are actually the flows, the circulation of goods and people. So today, what is taking place with this new human-centric vision is that what seemed to matter are interaction between people especially. And this is what platforms like Uber or Airbnb are primarily about. Uber is not about cars. It's about people in cars meeting with people wanting a car. So it's a social interaction just like Airbnb and many platform things. This is linked actually to a broader revolution, which is, speaking of flows that we inherited from the 19th century, a kind of pulverization of the vision we have of the city. The city is no longer a set of lines and flows. It actually becomes clouds of points, like, what is at the bottom of the picture. So this shift is probably the fundamental hypothesis made by urban theorists like Richard Florida or urban economists like Edward Glaser. For Edward Glaser, the triumph of the city is because cities connect people, which is actually a relatively recent definition. So these present consequences of infrastructure. I mentioned platforms. There is a tendency today to replace traditional infrastructure by platforms. No longer sewer systems are no longer supposed to be that important. Platforms are important. This is related, I won't be too long on that, to a more general dimension that is of, encounters are events, things that happened. And information is actually made of event. Bits are atoms of circumstances. So in some ways, it's as if the city was becoming what happens in the city when people interact. So by the same token, and I'll end up on this part, which is a bit difficult, but cities are this is one of the reasons we believe more and more that cities are computable, since they seem to be made of computable events, beginning with the interaction that constitute the matter of big data. But now I'd like actually to insist on the fact this is beautiful and this is what the smart city is supposed to become, this city of constant interaction, productive encounter between people, etc. But there are limits. And this is what I'd like to insist on. The first is that cities are actually not reducible to bits and encounters. It's striking, by the way, for me, that the age of the smart city is also the age of real estate soaring prices. And actually, the square meter is more expensive than the terabyte. So actually, the physical thing still matters. Cities are the biggest challenge of cities are not in the digital realm. They're in the world of atoms. Environmental challenges, such as seawater rise, for example, are a much more challenging thing than, adapting the city to smart technology. And if we take India, for example, sanitation is a much more urgent in slums, is a much more urgent problems than having smartphone. They have already a lot of smartphones. So this is related for me to a fundamental question, what it means to be human. We are embodied intelligence, and as such, we structure ourselves partially through our encounters with the material world. This is what I've tried to theorize through the notion of materiality. My latest book is on that subject. Similarly, the city is not populated only with a multitude of profiles that have been created for us on the internet by companies, institutions, and government. There is an increasing tendency to believe that profiles are people. They're not people. What I am, what you are on Amazon, is not what you are in the physical world. So finally, control and empowerment tend to project urban life on the side of what can be reasonably expected. This is actually erasing the capacity of humans to create the unexpected, a capacity that makes us truly political animals. I saw that Carlo had architecture is always political. Political means that things may happen that are not predictable. Otherwise, we're just in systems. So of course, we've seen a number of cases in which digital tools have been used to promote social and political activism. Think of the role of social networks in various movements of protest. But overall, the digital is more on the side of the predictable than on the side of the unexpected. And there is a paradox, by the way, because the digital is on the side of the predictable, and this is what makes actually the world unpredictable. Think of the role of social networks. Everything is computable, and the result by the end leads all kinds of surprising effects, from Trump election to the Brexit, to mention only a few, and not mentioning, of course, the Italian or the French, for that matter, situation. So, and I would go as far as to, to hypothesize that artificial intelligence is often presented as something that will increase the order, the predictability, etc. What if, just like social networks, it actually contributed to a greater degree of unpredictability? But not necessarily a good unpredictability. I'll return to that. So another way to understand this series of tension between the cities as populated by humans made of flesh, the city as a truly political entity and the city of bits that is emerging, is to pay attention to the temporal dimension. The physical time of the city is not the same as the digital time. Michele alluded to that. The first is slower. It is intimately linked to sedimentation, to the layering of traces left by former period. And this layering is what actually made the future a different future that is possible. The digital is much more rapid, flickering, oblivious of what was before, and by the same token, suggesting a condition of everlasting present. And this is why, by the way, interestingly, the first metaphor about the internet were in relation to Las Vegas. The internet was like Las Vegas. Everything happens all the time, but nothing really happens. So, and there is no past and no future, just an everlasting presence. This translates also in who we are. That's to say, the difference between what we are in the physical world and our profile is similarly marked by a contrast. When we are embodied, as embodied people, we have a greater degree of stability than what we do online. So the destabilization of urban time, of urban rhythm, but also of personal time and personal rhythm may be one of the greatest challenges we are confronted to. So the result is a time that aims at being controllable and we refer constantly to real-time monitoring as an ideal, but this time, because of its high degree of excitability, is actually full of unintended consequences. It produces the unexpected, but not necessarily a meaningful unexpected. To go back to recent political evolution, yes, the world is full of surprises, but not surprises that maybe are necessarily synonymous with a capacity to build a collective future, more a kind of fragmentation. So where do I want to arrive? Let me reassure you, I'm almost done. What about the humans? So let's be clear, I'm not at all an anti-technologist. I'm rather somebody who likes technology, but we need to answer a number of pressing challenges. So if the digital is accelerating the physical, is in acceleration compared to the physical world, it may be in need actually of deceleration, of slowing down. So I very often say that we need to create the equivalent of inertia in the digital world. And this is as important as rapidity. Because of that, we need, by the way, to associate more closely atoms and bits, and to recognize that actually atoms are more expensive than bits. We need to, in some ways, to give another example, Amazon, with a digital order, has used us to instant gratification. Instant gratification is not necessarily a good thing. It subverts the way we behave, etc. So I'd like to finish by proposing a couple of subjects of reflection on how to achieve, you know, a probably more humanist digital or smart city. Two subjects of reflection for me. One is how to consider humans not at the raw material that must be pulverized into millions of bits and reconstructed as profiles, but as the bearers of a positive capacity for surprise. Which means, by the way, there are a lot of artists today working on the notion of glitches. What if the true role of the humans in the digital city was actually to perturbate, to bring the unexpected in the digital city? Another interesting approach could be the notion of situation. What if instead of privileging scenario, that's to say a future already written, the digital could be mobilized to construct situation? And of course, it's a kind of reference to the old situationist belief, the city as a set of places with a potential for change, a potential for a different future. So I would be calling for a new situationism of the digital age. Another idea for me related to that is the idea of the stage. On a stage, not everything, of course we expect a play to happen, but the play is not necessarily written. It calls for actors. I think it's important to understand that. A stage is a catalyzer of possible plots. And to finish, I'd like to note that theater is about visuality. And here is a very famous engraving of Claude Nicolas Ledoux on the theater of Besançon, which remind us that actually the eyes of the city, we can understand it as the big brother, but we can also understand it as the eyes of the public. And I would say that probably just like theater is inseparable from the vision of a public, what kind of public are we trying to construct with the digital city? How is it going to be constituted? Of course, part of the difficulty lies in the fact that the public of the future will not be composed only of humans, and we're going to have a lot of non-human forms of intelligence. But again, what is the public? So just to conclude, to remind us that technology in the city, this is not fundamentally actually a technological problem. It is a political problem. Hence Carlo dressing today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So the link between the end of your speech and your T-shirt is perfect. So, but just let me thank having raised the discussion between the digital side of the city and its physicality. I think the next two speeches will be quite important on it because, of course, Carlo works are very well known, starting from getting to the physical side of the city, starting for the digital, is the main issue of his lab, the Sensible City at MIT, while we will see that for Zhang Li, the physicality of the city is the starting point. So the installation that Zhang Li will produce for the Eyes of the City Biennale will be called the skin of the city, talking about the touch of the public space, of the human on the public space. This double condition also reminds to me something that Joseph Stiglitz was saying 2 days ago in the opening of the festival, the Nobel Prize of Economics, calling for more community-oriented economies, was talking about data representing people, data that can move everywhere easily, while the people represented are still a quite limited movement because of the physical problem, of course, but mostly because of identity that ask people to still live in community and being rooted in locality. So this double face, I think, will raise a question from the speech by Carlo for the recorded speech by Zhang Li just after that.
Okay, well, first of all, I need to declare one thing, and we need to declare actually Antoine and I are writing a book together right now about cities and maps. It's called the Atlas of the Sensible City. And that's why I will start a little bit by teasing him. And I said that what he presented is very interesting, but it's based on a very fundamental ambiguity. And the ambiguity is that making the city computational and understanding the city and the layers of the city that we couldn't see before doesn't mean at all reducing, as he put it, surprise, or as I would put it, serendipity. But actually, we can use the digital to increase serendipity in our cities. And if we do that, then we're not doing a city that develops like, an Amazon shop where things try to be predictable and they are not, and they become more and more boring. But actually, we can build a city that develops much more in an inherent way, like human evolution. We can really move towards the co-evolution of the artificial and the natural world. In order to make that point, I want to tell you my story of the city, my version of the same story that you heard from Antoine. And the story starts from something very similar. I picked slightly different images, but you saw the physical city is the city that Nolli in 1747 was mapping in Rome when he redefined modern cartography. Well, if you start from that, today we can look at the city with different eyes. Those were the eyes of the city that, for instance, Cerdà, the father of modern Barcelona, was dreaming upon. When he wrote the great theory of urbanization in the second half of the 19th century, he was dreaming upon a city where we would understand flows and things, like this. That's actually a visualization of Lisbon that was done by Pedro Cruz from our lab at MIT. It was a MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and it shows a city like we couldn't see before. It's a city with real-time data coming from billions and billions of billions and billions of data points coming from sensors all across the city. And if you take this data, then you don't need to use it to predict, but actually to lead it as a beginning for human imagination and invention. And I want to tell you the same data, how we use it in the city of New York. Actually, you might have seen, you might recognize this map. This is a map that also Antoine had it. It's a map that we did in New York. You see every dot is a taxi pickup and drop-off. Which place is this in New York, by the way? Any thoughts? Yes, JFK Airport. Then if you have JFK is here, you see Manhattan and all of the boroughs. Incidentally, I'll tell you a little story. This data is data that was made accessible by Mike Bloomberg. As you might know, Mike Bloomberg built a giant company on data. It's Bloomberg. Actually, he might run for president, we hope, for the next election. He just announced it he's just considering, that's what was reported in the papers in the past few days. But, he built a giant company on data, and when he was mayor of New York, he tried to really make data accessible to people for analysis. I remember in his office, Mike Bloomberg had a little sign that went, "In God we trust, everybody else bring data." And so what we did, we got some of the data that he was making accessible and we started analyzing it. And the first question we asked was, if you take those 2 points in Manhattan, you got hundreds of thousands of trips connecting them in the course of the year. So how many of those trips could be shared? and then we analyze it mathematically. That's a paper in PNAS, the Procedure in the National Academies of Science, that we did together with some mathematician friends like Steven Strogatz. We use network science to answer that question. Again, is data becomes the beginning of a discovery process which is inherently human. It's not predicting the city, it's asking design questions about the city. And the design question is how many trips, as I said, could be shared. Now, the result of that investigation led to this paper and to discovering that in New York we could actually take everybody to destination when they need to be there, give or take 1, 2, or 3 minutes, but with 40% of the vehicles we have today. Now, we started this 5 years ago, more or less, when Uber had not launched Uber Pool yet, and the results started a nice discussion. The New York Times wrote about this and so on, and then we got a call from Uber. We started a collaboration with Uber, and as you know, Uber Pool does exactly this today. Allows 2 people going more or less in the same direction, sharing a ride, which means 1 less car on the road, which means less congestion, less energy consumption, less pollution in our cities. So that was a very little story of how we can take the city, discover a hidden dimension we always dreamt upon through digital data, but then use that as the beginning of a design inquiry. And the design inquiry is full of serendipity or surprise, as Antoine put it, and in this case, led to this. And today, Uber Pool is actually quite significant all over the world. It's several $1 billion of revenue for Uber worldwide. In many cities, is a significant chunk. In San Francisco, it was at one point over 50% of all trips every day happening by 2 people sharing the ride and hence changing traffic in the city. Now, if you're interested, there's some more papers. I put the papers because I see there's a lot of students from Politecnico. All the papers are on our website. I will not discuss the mathematics, but actually I'll put them there, so if you're interested, you can go and look at them. So from here, I'll tell you about another project we did also with similar data. We ask a different question. In New York, what is the minimum number of cars we would need in order to keep New York on the move? Here's a little video. So what you see here, you see this is real data again, the city like we couldn't see before. Here you see the algorithms, but it's not prediction, it's rethinking with design how we could organize the city. And you see here, how the algorithm works, and you see how the city is today to the right, and how it could be tomorrow to the left with many less cars, with potentially, again, a much more efficient way to do dispatching in the city. So I'll tell you a couple of things, by the way, about this. This was a piece of scientific research. It was published in Nature, but also MIT filed a patent on it, and that's the beginning of the last company we started. Over the past few years, we started 3 companies in the US, 2 in Italy, 1 in Singapore. But the idea is that you can take this and take it to the market. Potentially tomorrow, people think that all the value that you have in system for dispatching, for like Uber, for mobility on demand, will be in the algorithms. And this actually is the most optimized algorithm you can ever find. So I think the idea is that, again, you get digital data, you analyze it, but that's where the human part comes in, and then you can discover new things about the city. I want to tell you a few other things about, the car itself is now rich of data, go a bit faster. It collects thousands of data points like this. It's a Volkswagen car. We are working with Volkswagen quite a lot. And then you can use it to understand things. For instance, to avoid that this happens again. And why did this happen a year ago? It happened because we didn't monitor it. But it happened many other times. It happened here with Tacoma Bridge. Tacoma Bridge in the United States, collapsed because, again, it started resonating. You might know it if you study civil engineering, one of the most famous collapses in the history of civil engineering. But again, we didn't understand it well enough. I'll tell you another story about this bridge, which is in Boston. It's called Longfellow Bridge. MIT starts to the left. To the right, you've got Boston, and it wasn't monitored. And a few years ago, they saw it as very serious structural flaws. So from one day to the next, very quickly they had to stop it, to rebuild it at a huge cost, a few $100 million, and then, they disconnected the city for a number of years. And the reason for that is that it wasn't monitored again. So today, to monitor a bridge, you put sensors on the bridge, like this, but it's very expensive. You put sensor, you send people, but it can cost you up to $500,000 per year to instrument the bridge. And you get data about vibration. But before actually what happened in Genoa, we were working on a little alternative. And the little alternative is that today, every car has a vibration measurement system, but also every phone has an accelerometer. And every box, like what you see there, has an accelerometer. So we ask ourselves, what if we could actually use this in order to monitor the infrastructure almost at zero cost? And we picked initially this bridge, the Golden Gate, because the Golden Gate is very well known, is very well studied, very well researched, so it's perfect ground truth. We know everything about it. So we started going back and forth across the Golden Gate many, many times, over 100 times. That's why you want to have many research students involved in the project. After 100 times, the San Francisco police got a bit suspicious, so they pulled us over. And then we collected the data, and you see the data here, that's the raw data. But then when you analyze the data, actually it turns out you can find all of those frequencies, the vibration frequencies of the bridge. So now we're working both with Uber in the United States, and we're working with Allianz, the German insurer, here in Italy, in order to see if we can actually scale up at the scale of an entire country. In Italy, we are collaborating as well with ANAS, the Italian highway system, in order to see, can we actually use this? Because then data is not perfect, but you get an amazing scan of all of the road system. And then when you see a problem, you can then go and put the sensors. A bit like when you go in hospital first and measure your temperature, your blood pressure, and then if you see there's something wrong, they can send you for an MRI or something more expensive. So the same idea, how we can use data for better understanding the city, and then, again, human ingenuity can come in and fix it. I'll tell you a few additional things. So one, if you have 2 additional sensors on the cars, those cars start driving themselves because they get a 3-dimensional scan of the city like this, and then artificial intelligence allows to do it. But that is interesting not because you don't need to keep your hands on the wheel, but because you can completely redefine mobility. Today, a car is used 5% of the time. If it becomes self-driving, people can keep on using it. So you can rethink the mobility, and we're working a lot on that. Then, if tomorrow we got a system which is fully self-driving, other things might change. For instance, this. You all know this is a well-known traffic light. And traffic lights actually appear on our roads when cars appears on our roads around 100 years ago. But if you got an intelligent system where every car knows where it is and where the other cars are, you don't need to stop anymore. You can keep on going, just avoiding collisions, like this. Don't try it yet. I showed this in Naples, and they told me, so what is new here? Nobody laughs? But anyway, I'll tell you, I'm Italian, so I can make such jokes, but I tell you what Minister Martino once said that in Milan, maybe in Turin, traffic lights are instructions. In Rome, they're suggestions. In Naples, they are Christmas decorations. Anyway, if you're interested, there's also a scientific paper. There's a lot of mathematics. If you love mathematics and design, then you can do amazing things by looking at how you can redesign the intersection using queuing theory and extending queuing theory. It's really a new space in between planning, architecture, design, mathematics, and physics, and complex systems. And I think, again, to say that is where it's not predicting, it's thinking about something new and serendipitous. 2 final projects to finish. One, we started looking at trees. Believe it or not, we know very little about where trees are in cities. We're working also, I'm not showing today our architecture and design work, which, by the way, we do in New York and in Torino at Carlo Ratti Associati. Today, we're not showing that, I'm showing just research. But we're working with the office a lot on also on architecture incorporates nature in Milan and around the world. But here we started to quantify in cities, nature and trees. And so what we are doing, we're actually using, that's a paper, we're using data from Google that you find all over the world. We use artificial intelligence to understand where trees are. And we're producing these maps. And the amazing thing in the past 2 years is that people all over the world started using the maps. We actually opened the library so people can run their own analysis. If you want to run it for your own city, you can email us and you can do it, and we put it online. And it becomes a crowdsourced effort to understand it. And then citizens are going back to their mayor and say, hey, how comes that my neighborhood is so low, and then maybe you want to initiate action. So data becomes a way, again, to start a new process that brings human bodies back into the loop. In the same ways, we're working also on viruses and bacteria. That's one of the latest projects we're doing. here we are actually, when it's not the project yet, there's actually a map of London by John Snow. And that's a map that actually allowed, at the time, the discovery of how cholera is transmitted. And today we're doing something similar. So in the time, it was about looking at water in wells and looking at case of cholera. So that map allowed to understand that cholera was related to pollution in the water system. And today we're something similar, going into sewage and collecting viruses and bacteria from sewage and understanding really how they relate to human health. Here is a little video. So that's a sewage system in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We call the project Underworlds. That's our team, part of our team. Nusha, by the way, Nusha just started a company based on this. So just took some, we've been working on this for 2 years. And that's a little robot that goes down into sewage to collect samples. Initially, we did it manually. Then we thought it was not that fun, so we designed with our colleagues a little robot that does it for us. That's all the viruses and bacteria you find, which actually most of them come from us. In our bodies, for every cell in your body, there is around 9 or 10 viruses and bacteria living with us. That's a microbiome. It's one of the key responsibles for human health. And that's like the aggregated, collective human microbiome we find into sewage. And so in the remaining 2 minutes I have, I want to tell you a final project that has an example of what Antoine said about the glitches. The glitches are also very important. Now, a few years ago, we started looking at waste. Today, you know everything about this computer. We know how things are made. But we don't know what happens to them when we throw them away. Sometimes waste ends up where it shouldn't end up. So we decided to design a little chip to put on waste and track it and follow it. We had to engineer it. So here it was like engineering a miniature smartphone, a miniature cell phone. With a difference, a cell phone does many operations for limited time, 1 day. But this has just to do limited operations, just report location for a long time, 6, 12, 18 months. So if you're interested, that's a paper you find the thing. So we had to design that little cell phone. We put it on waste. That was the first deployment in Seattle. 500 volunteers with 3,000 pieces of trash. We put a tag on all of them. And after tagging them, we started following them. So 3,000 pieces of object, piece of trash. The day of deployment in Seattle. But then after a few days, you see some of the main landfills next to Seattle. But then a big surprise, how stuff started to travel. Sometimes in crazy, unexpected way. Again, serendipity. Look at the trace that went all the way to Chicago, changed his mind, and went back to California. And still moving after 1 month or 2 months. So out of the project, we learned many things about waste, about how people change their behavior if you give them data. By the way, we thought that the Farewell Symphony by Haydn was the right music. So we learned a lot of things about how we can optimize this, save energy, how people, if you share the data with people, they can change their behavior. Data itself is an amazing design tool. People understand something, we understand something about the consequences of what we do, and then we change our behavior. But we also discovered places such as this one in the middle of the jungle. So over the past, more recently, we've been engaged in the largest e-waste tracking experiment ever done on the planet. We started from the United States. We looked at waste, e-waste here, just electronic waste all over the world. going to Asia, going to Africa, going to Europe. Some of those traces are legal, but some of those are not. And again, data can help us to make a better world, to understand the global flows and see how we can correct it. If you're interested, you'll find all of that on the website. You can click on each trace. And there's also a special TV series by PBS, the American public television broadcaster, that follows some of the pieces of trash. But I want to finish with the glitch, as I told you. And digital is also the unexpected. It's also serendipity. We have many examples. In this case, it didn't happen to us. It happens to a very poor guy who one day came to our lab, to our offices in Boston. And this poor guy stole a lot of things, was a thief or a burglar. He stole a lot of things, but he also stole a bunch of computers and tags that tell you where they go. And this is what happened. Thank you.
Continue immediately with the video recorded by Brian Jalli, titled "Man in the City of Technology, Data or Algorithm."
Hello, everyone. It's a great honor of mine to be invited to the Technology Festival of Politecnico, to be able to talk to some of the best architecture minds of our time is a wonderful opportunity. I cannot say thank you enough to Politecnico for giving me this wonderful opportunity. Unfortunately, due to visa process issues, I am not able to present myself today in Turin. I would like to give my deepest apology for my absence. The only thing I can do at the moment, as suggested by Professor Michele Bonino, is to share my thoughts in this video. The haunting question of cities and technologies is far from being resolved. Ever since the end of early industrialization, the cycle of hype, ecstasy, anxiety, and despair has been in loops time and again. For decades, or even centuries, from people like Mumford and people like Massey, we have been taking revealing insights from both sides of the debate. Yet facing our current time of endless technological innovations, we still find ourselves divided right down the middle at the old dilemma between more convenient or more independent. It is true that technologies are changing our cities, but let us be aware that although there are not such things as good technologies or bad technologies, there are good users and bad users of technologies. The good user technology expands our capabilities and takes command from us. The bad user technology replaces our capabilities and takes command of us. One key debate today in this regard is the use of information technology in our cities. AI, 5G, blockchain, and the ever-growing computing power in our planet are making our lives easier. But let us be aware that they shall remain as the infrastructure of our lives, not the superstructure. Cashierless supermarket checking out was a good idea. Self-checkout machines used to doing this job very well. They speed up the checking out process without doing any more. However, recent surge of branded supermarkets, particularly those owned by some big online shopping brands, is not reassuring at all. You have to use the designated apps on your phone or register and check out by your face, trading all your purchase info for that extra amount of convenience. A similar example is the keyless parking lots. At that time, it was just paying machine. Now it is the parking cameras covering almost every corner of our streets and labeling to pay later online. There is, of course, no more bothering of going to pay the machine, but there is no longer anywhere to keep your parking data to yourself either. Another key element of the good tech, bad tech debate is related to the treatment of the human body. There is no question that our urban life paradigms are continuously evolving. But what is usually forgotten is that there are two tracks of this evolution: the technological one and the biological one. Along the technological track, the ways we complete our day-to-day tasks are changing rapidly. New design norms are being generated yearly, monthly, or even weekly to accommodate the new functionality. Along the biological track, however, the ways we appreciate urban life, particularly in moments of family and leisure, doesn't change much, because the human body hasn't changed much in the last 10,000 years, and the pleasure, playfulness, and poetics of the human body haven't changed much either. We are still in urgent need of better human scale and high-quality public spaces, probably more so than ever at a time when technologies are leading us more into the virtual world, where the human body in the city is being marginalized. To wrap up my presentation, I would like to use an analogy. We might look at the life in the city as a program, running with the data generated daily and under an evolving algorithm on both the virtual and the physical world. Let us make sure that in such a program, no one individual is only a part of the data. Let us be certain that everyone is a part of the algorithm as well. A better city is one where technologies are better programmed by men and made work better for men, not the other way around. Thank you very much indeed.
Now it's time to specify better the title of today, Occhi, della città, Eyes of the City. That is the title of our exhibition at the Shenzhen Biennale. All of us are involved. Carlo Ratti is the chief curator of the exhibition. Politecnico di Torino, a big group, most of them are here in the room, is the academic curator. Antoine Picon was involved as one of the foundational contributors, as you will see, a group of 20 experts from all around the world giving suggestions starting from our curatorial statement. And Zhang Li was one of the selected architects with the already mentioned installation Urban Skin. I just will show 5 slides to give a general overview. Hope some of you will take the opportunity to go and see on site, but since the opening will be next month, December 21st, and not easy for all of you to be there, I think it's nice to see what is going to happen in Shenzhen. So Eyes of the City is based, I will invite Carlo to share more about the choice of this title, answering to the basic question, what happens when the city acquires the ability to see almost as if it had eyes. So the idea is now not only people to people can look to each other, but also buildings and streets can recognize us, and on one side giving answer to us, answering to our needs, on the other side controlling us. So this is the main issue of our exhibition. What is important to say that the given topic from the organizing committee, when we answered the bid, the competition among 20 international teams, was about technology, new technology, and urban space. That is basically the topic of today. This is the venue, so the new railway station, high-speed railway station in Futian, that is the center of Shenzhen. This is the new station connecting to Hong Kong. And so you can also imagine that is a not easy moment to deal with such infrastructural topic linking to the situation in Hong Kong, just 10 minutes by train to Hong Kong from here. The idea was to having the exhibition inside the station. So this is a preliminary sketch. Just yesterday night, the works of building the installation were starting. And so now the idea of a duty-free exhibition is under construction. So the duty-free idea is because we consider that, of course, many of the exhibitors, of the visitors will be there for this. Last edition, the Biennale of Shenzhen got 500,000 of visitors, a very important number, is double of Venice Biennale. But most of the visitors will be unconscious visitors, just travelers going to the train. From this station it's possible to go south to Hong Kong, but also to Beijing, to the north of China. So very busy station, is the second biggest station in Asia. And so the idea of involving these travelers into the exhibition through a system of duty-free, attracting people liking us mandatory path towards the train was the main concept for it. And the same idea of a kind of open exhibition, not only devoted to the visitors, but also to the travel. The same idea of openness was used in the process of selection of the participants. Last May, we launched an open call. More than 300 applicants from around the world answered the call, and we selected finally 65 architects or urban planners. Also, we had the contribution of the already mentioned foundationals, contributors. You can find all of them in Arc Daily. There is a number of texts reacting to our topic, Eyes of the City. And then to the end, through a short listing at the organization in 8 sections, the 65 architects will be displayed, and all the others as well, in a kind of general portrait of the participation to the open call. Also is open the process of production of the Biennale, considering also the difficult to ship to China all the installation of the material product of the architects. We organize a process of local production. You can see that Shenzhen is the lab of the world, is the factory of the world. The production in Shenzhen is very easy for model, 3D printing, additive manufacturing, whatever. So we asked the architects not to ship their project, but to send a digital blueprint that will be put online, an open source blueprint, so everybody can visit the Biennale from the day of the opening also on the website, and then also download it, making everything about this, while a unique process of local production started for the installations. And then, on this, I will leave the floor to Carlo again, because he's promoted very much this important news. facial recognition is included in the exhibition, and people will be recognized in the entrance. This is the entrance pavilion designed by MVRDV for the exhibition, and then can choose if being followed, being recognized, and during the exhibition having some elements from this condition, or refuse. So it will be targeted, it will have something to make him recognizable as the person who didn't want to be controlled by the facial recognition. So I will ask Carlo now, since Eyes of the City was a concept, the title was proposed by you, and then we created a statement, maybe to go through this. And Antoine, as one of the foundational ones for the statement, then to have feedback to the Carlo statement.
Sure. Thanks, Michele. Maybe you should go in front or all together, yeah?
If you don't need the slides,
yeah.
You can go in front, yes.
Yeah, no, it's good. Well, thanks a lot, Michele. First of all, it has been, a great pleasure. We work all together with Politecnico, with the team in China on the Biennale side. Well, Eyes of the City to us was inspired by a famous phrase by Jane Jacobs. Some of you might know Jane Jacobs. She was a great urbanist from the past century. She was Canadian, worked a lot in the United States. She fought a lot for New York, trying to fight against Robert Moses at the time, around 50 years ago, in order to preserve the vibrancy of small villages in New York. And there's a famous thing that she says in many of in her books, and a phrase that's become quite very connected with her thinking, which is eyes on the street. And so when she talks about the community, she was studying, for instance, Greenwich Village in New York City. And so the community is a community that is formed by human interaction, again, as Antoine was saying before. It is a community where eyes on the street contribute to the construct, to the building of what Latins would say the civitas. The Latins had two words for city. One was urb, or the urb, was the physical city, and then the other one was the civitas. The civitas was a community of citizens. So eyes on the street for her was a very important component of that, where we see each other. And that's the beginning of how we start human interaction. I think by looking at each other, like today in this room, is actually how we start to make connections. Initially, just very tenuous connections can build up over time, and those are the connections that create the community. Now, then we wanted to explore this kind of new condition, as Michele was saying, which is what happens when the city itself can look back. What happens when the city starts to multiply all these eyes, as Brian was saying before. So, and that's we said, that's not something that would be up to us to discuss, but it's something we should really open up and try to pose as a question for the Biennale. So this has been the discussion. If you're interested, you can see a lot of amazing contributions already on Arc Daily. Antoine, it was mentioned, was one of the contributors, but Dayan Sujic, people from all over the world have been dealing with this kind of topic. And now we'll explore it again next month. Again, we want to use design as speculative design. Design as a way to explore different scenarios. Design as a way to start a conversation about how we should deal with this city, which is populated by more and more artificial eyes. I mean, that's what I would say. I could talk more about this, but I think that's probably enough. Maybe I'll build on a couple of things that Michele said just to reinforce them. That yes, we are quite excited about two things. The first thing, this is the first Biennale ever which is totally fabricated there. We saved tons of CO2. We just do digitally. Everybody was asked to send their digital stuff, and it's fabricated in Shenzhen. So the idea of exploring already a future world where we don't need to move things around the planet using a lot of CO2, we can just ship blueprints, and then things are fabricated there. And Shenzhen seems to be the best place for do it, because as Michele was saying, is the factor that the world is one of the places where a lot of the stuff being produced today is actually made. A city that was nothing 30 years ago, and now is one of the biggest urban hubs in the world and one of the biggest production hubs in the world. So number one, and also the fact that yes, we try to do this in a very open way. Again, we believe in open architecture. We believe in architecture is very different than architecture in the 20th century. And again, I will, as we've known each other for forever, since we were kids, and we're writing a book together. So I'll tease a little bit Antoine, who's chairing the Fondation Le Corbusier. I think Le Corbusier, for me, epitomizes the attitude of architecture in the 20th century, which was, one man making decisions for millions of people without even bothering to ask them. Think about the plan Voisin for Paris. Destroy the whole city, planning to destroy the whole city without even bothering to ask people who wanted to be part of the process. Our office is now, our New York office is now working on the, one of the major extensions of Brasilia that, as you know, was designed by Lucio Costa and Oscar Niemeyer. Brasilia as well is a city that never worked because it doesn't have that richness that comes by actually participation and openness. So we're big believers of an open process, and the curatorship, as Michele showed, was really an open process, a process that had an open call, that mixed top-down and bottom-up, that combined the two threads. I think that graph that I believe was done by Paolo Ciuccarelli, right? This one. Yeah, Paolo Ciuccarelli is a great data visualization designer from Boston, who's helping us with visualizing many things about the Biennale. So that graph for me is really more like a metaphor, not only of this Biennale, but of what architecture planning should more and more look like, which is an open process.
You have in common. Since you launched a provocation, you have in common something with Le Corbusier. Le Corbusier produced all his architecture completely oblivious of what was going on at large in the world. And you're producing this exhibition a few kilometers from Hong Kong. So there is something of a kind of indifference to what's going on in the world at large, also in your attitude. So you might, by the end, belong to the 20th century, Carlo.
It's a very important point. Actually, I want to thank Antoine for raising this point. When we started the exhibition, we took on, the Shenzhen Biennale has started more recently than the Venice Biennale, but has grown into a bigger Biennale for public and, very influential in Asia. So when we were very excited with Michele and the team to take on this challenge, the challenge in Hong Kong had not started yet. And we've been very puzzled about, what was happening in the street. Somehow, the same topics were happening on the other side there as well. But that's why we wanted to call for everybody's input to deal with that. Again, I can give you my stance on that. And, that's very clear and about how we should use this technology and how they should not be used for some of the things that unfortunately we're seeing in different parts of the world. But I think it's the way again to solve that. I don't think it should be up to us to make a decision. I mean, probably Corbusier would have his own stance, but it's more about to open a process and start a conversation. So again, that's is what I think our role should be, to use design in a speculative way in order to pose a question and get different answers.
That was Le Corbusier answer, by the way. So you're actually completely reproducing Le Corbusier. Anyway. No, I think it's ironic because it's too easy to say. I do think there is a problem of reconnecting the digital with politics. Whatever you say, what's happening in Hong Kong and the fact you're doing in parallel this exhibition, and since I wrote one of the texts initially, God knows I'm completely sympathetic to the whole enterprise, but we do have to reconnect, all this advanced technology with the political unrest of the world. So I think this is a major political problem. And it's not enough to wear a T-shirt. So the second thing I'd like to say is that Eyes of the City for Jane Jacobs was about the issue I raised in my presentation, which is who's the public? I think it's the fundamental question. Is the public, to go back to Hong Kong, are the eyes of the city the police? Are the eyes of the city the protester? What are the constituencies? And I think, vision by the end is not about the technicality of vision, it's about who is watching, whose eyes are they. And the city is not an answer, because the city is actually a lot of communities. You reminded us that city civitas, it's about a society. So who's looking, who's watching, etc. is for me the fundamental question. And Jane Jacobs had an answer, but today we no longer know. So I think that's, for me, one of the interests of what you're doing, is by the end, who is the civitas today?
And maybe then to add to that, I think there's something very interesting that perhaps through in this kind of roundabout way brings back to what Antoine was somehow defending, the primacy of physical space which is connected to our bodies, and physical space that has a more linear relationship with time, physical space which is what anchors us through space and time, anchor our lives, our mutating lives into space and time. So, but I think maybe there's here another way to look at it, which is exactly precisely the political thing. Because in the political thing, what we discovered, we didn't see it 10 years ago, nobody saw it coming, that when you actually go on social media, you tend to end up with polarization. You know, you're all familiar, probably Christmas is coming up, and I'm sure all of you had some Christmas dinner where you had some kind of, somebody in the family, an old uncle or whatever, who was a bit nuts and was voicing his nuts ideas at the table. And everybody would say, you know, shut up, you know, we heard it, and so on. But now the very same guy can actually go online and find a bunch of other nuts people who actually are reinforcing each other's idea, and the things are diverging. And that's what's happening, as you know, on social media, is the fact that we get to all these kind of communities that fragment and polarize. This kind of polarization is going on social media. And somehow I think that one of the key values of physical space is that it helps us to recompose those fractures. Physical space here, maybe there's some extremists in this room as well, probably statistically. There's so many of you, so there might be someone. But I think this space is where different opinion can be recomposed. So I would claim somehow we got them back to the initial point that was made, that is not because of the lack of surprise or serendipity that we should not just totally embrace the digital, because the physical is perhaps the most powerful antidote we have to this divergence that we're seeing online. The physical, the public space, the space of the city, the eyes of the city that Jane Jacobs were talking about is where we connect with each other, and we're actually, the divergence is recomposed into the civitas. So I would, so...
20th century, Carlo. No, I couldn't agree more. I think in the physical space acts as a stabilization of a number of things. You know, there have been a lot of studies by sociologists of online behavior. Online, you tend to be more radical in your position. And, you know, once you get bored by your position, you just change position. When you're in physically present, you're more consistent. And that's one of the big problems of democracy online, is that actually our personality online is much less stable than when we're physically present. So yes, I think this is why I believe by the end, you know, augmented reality, the hybridization of atoms and bits is the direction we have to go more and more, but not forgetting that the atoms is the real anchor.
Okay, maybe we can leave time. We
yes.
have 10 minutes more, so 2 or 3 questions will be.
Or even more. Any thoughts, ideas, questions? Just raise your hands.
Anche in italiano,
yeah.
se preferite. Poi
I see one hand here. Kelly, you want to give it?
Two questions. One is concerning the concept of who is looking at through the eyes of the city, and I remarked very correctly that you referred to the ancient ideas of urbs and civitas. But the first question related to this, did you consider all these concepts also through the traditional Chinese culture? That means quo is urbs and Tiansha is civitas, or at least the civitas of Caracalla, the general civitas. Second question, there is something paradoxical that at some kilometers from your exhibition, Huawei has built a sort of new town, his Huawei campus, which, contrary to all theories of modern architecture, they have reproduced the historical centers of 12 European Middle Ages towns, which shall become their headquarters. What is the meaning of this apparent contradiction?
Should I start, or do you want to start? Maybe I start from the second one. I start from the second point about, you know, Huawei. Well, I think, you know, that I wouldn't say it's a contradiction, because actually in that town by Huawei is actually smoke, mirrors the smoke outside. Sure, it looks like that. But over there in their campus, everything is captured and sensed and controlled. So I think that's almost, you know, no, it's not a contradiction. It's almost like you're creating a dichotomy whereby you hide that surveillance, because that is when it's done by a big company. I mean, what we want to do is, these technologies are there, right? In all of your pockets, there is a sensor that takes thousands of data points from you in the course of the day. In Carl Olmos here phone in his pocket, there's the same sentence that is you that tells you where you are every second of your life. And now the question is, how can we cope with that? I think the only way to cope with that is an open platform in a transparent way. If you go into putting this into a campus where all this information is held by corporate structure and is used by corporate structure, maybe with a smokes and mirror or putting an old medieval facade in front of it, I think that's really what you don't want to do. So I think that makes the point that exactly precisely because of that, it's more and more important that we have things such as the Shenzhen Biennale, things that make us think about how we should use and cope with these technologies. We need to use them in an open way, as we were saying, in the same way as the architects. We need to talk about them, about the consequences of them. We cannot afford to give them to big corporations, especially if they hide them behind the facade that looks innocuous, but it's not. And for the first part about the Chinese side, sometimes I get a bit bored when I'm in Italy because people always go to this kind of very, say, the historical, the local, and so on. Let's face it, Shenzhen is producing what the whole world is using. The debate, the questions are global here. So the challenges are those. Let's forget for a moment about all our little provincial things. No, let's focus on the real issues. So I think that's what we are trying to do at the Biennale. Any other thoughts? Yes.
It's coming, sorry, the microphone, so everybody can hear. Also it's streaming. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe you need to turn it on, I think.
Okay, managed. I was just wondering, what are both of your thoughts on facial recognition, especially in China? Because while we're talking phones or computers or other technologies, those are things that people can just generally kind of opt out. Maybe if you really don't want to have a phone or you don't want GPS or whatever, you can kind of choose to not have one in this day and age. But once you put facial recognition inside a city, the government, the police, everyone knows that you is you and you're going around and doing stuff. And it's not like you can opt out of that. Isn't that like a big jump?
Can I ask you a question? Do you have a smartphone?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so actually, even if you say you can opt out, but actually if you opt out having a smartphone, you cut yourself from large chunks of social life.
Yeah.
Just like, I'm still on Facebook, I find Facebook horrible, etc. But so many of my connection, I'm connected only through Facebook, former students, etc., that actually I don't abandon Facebook. So in a way, we're trapped. And facial recognition is an additional layer. By the way, I'm very worried about your people opting out of the facial recognition in your exhibition, because God knows what will happen. Makes me a bit nervous. But truth is, large part of our social life now are completely inseparable from digital media. So, can you really opt out? Of course, you can make tremendous effort to buy things, not on Amazon, etc. But, can you opt out really of having a cell phone, for example? There's still a couple of, or you go off the grid, but it's very difficult.
Yeah. I think actually, I would like to add to that. I agree with this. Let me add something to the answer. So the first point is the same point Antoine did. And by the way, by raising your hands, anybody who doesn't have a smartphone in the room. Don't be shy. Okay, wonderful. No, but you have a cell phone. You have a cell, but no smartphone. Okay, so so the cell phone as well can be tracked. The smartphone, however, collects much more data from your pockets. So you see here, I think, I agree with Antoine. Sometimes it's the same thing, yes, and you could opt, in the same way there's kind of the deal you have is that it doesn't give you choice. How do you say, I agree, without reading all those texts that say that your data will be collected, or you're out of many things. Then in the same way, you could say you stay home, you don't go out, you're not captured by cameras. Would be the same. So the situation is the same, but it's not to say that we do not believe that opt-out should be an option. And that's why, in both cases, That's why GDPR is helping with smartphones to allow people to better understand what data is used for, and also when they want to opt out. We still need to understand better how to make it work, but I think that's happening. And that's why we need to do the same thing also at the level of the city with facial recognition. That's why we're doing this in the Biennale was an experiment, first Biennale ever. We're using first exhibition ever, as far as we know in the world. We're using facial recognition to see, how we can play with it in a different way. So we highlight all the cameras and give opt-out to people. So what I'm saying is, even if I don't see a big difference in the condition, but I agree with you that we need to opt out or somehow making the technology transparent is a big must, both digitally from our smartphones and for the cameras in the city.
Thank you both for your answers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, I have to stop the discussion because the next panel is coming. So no time for more questions, but to thank you.
But thank you all very much.
And Carlo for
to be
your
continued.
participation. So, join us in Shenzhen on 21st of December. There is a website, eyesofthecity.net, that will be put online for this.
Yeah,
It's
join us on
already online.
Shenzhen, and if you are in Boston, come visit us, or if you want to come to our offices here in Italy, in Torino as well, do stop by.